I like old furniture, and the more I work with it, the more I like it. But that's not the reason that I do what I do. The primary reason that I enjoy repairing furniture is because of the challenge of solving problems, the challenge of developing the skills, of pulling something off that maybe a week before or a year before I know I could have never done. I get very frustrated when I see bad repairs, because bad repairs means that the furniture is being destroyed. And there's only so much of this furniture around. It'll never be made again. And every piece that is repaired poorly has had its death warrant signed. It's only a matter of time before the repairs break down, and then the furniture breaks down, and then the furniture is thrown away. Furniture repair involves two things, really. It involves gluing, and it involves making parts. It involves woodworking skills, which are infinite. But all of them come together in gluing. And if you can't glue the piece properly, if you can't make it structurally strong, then its days are numbered. It doesn't make any difference how well you can reproduce the part. If you can't make the piece structurally sound, it isn't going to last. Hello, my name is Bob Flexner. I restore old furniture and find it a challenging and rewarding way to earn a living. In this tape, I'd like to show you how I go about doing repair work. Refinishing is another subject. Let's begin by looking at a bad repair, like what's been done to this walnut sofa from the 1860s. Apparently, at some point, the joints were coming apart, and instead of regluing it, somebody attached brackets to all of the joints, which had the effect of holding them together, but it didn't stop the furniture from wiggling. And so the result was it broke in numerous places where it wouldn't have broken if it had been repaired properly to start off with. It's not uncommon for a repair to cause more damage than it fixes. I can show you that in this balloon back chair, which is about the same age as the sofa, and which had also worked loose at the joints. It should have been reglued. Instead, it was nailed back together. When I knocked the joint apart, you can see that all the pieces fall off because these nails acted as wedges and caused the wood to split. Now the joint is almost totally destroyed. It isn't necessary to add metal to joints to repair furniture. I can show you that on this early 20th century oak rocker. The seat is made of 4 oak boards glued edge to edge, the grain running this way. All of the joints are sound except the one here, which has split right on the seam, probably due to a bad glue job when the chair was made. The proper repair would be to re-glue this joint. But instead, somebody has added a board underneath, which not only does not solve the problem, somebody's going to sit on this chair one day and the whole thing's going to crumble, but it's going to create a new problem over on this side, causing a new split, because whoever put this piece of wood in didn't understand one of the fundamental characteristics of wood, that it responds to humidity changes. It absorbs moisture and expands, or releases moisture and shrinks, just like a sponge, except that wood does it only in one direction, across the grain and not along the grain. So in this case, a cross-grain construction was created where none existed in the original design, and interferes with the natural movement of this seat. Often it's necessary to create cross-grain construction, as we've seen in this furniture here. Legs and rails, arms and legs, or in this case, a skirt and a leg from a table. Cross-grain construction, the joint is formed by a tenon or tongue in the skirt, which slides into a mortise or slot in the leg. This is necessarily a stressful situation. You see this split here? It's caused by the wood in the skirt wanting to shrink and not being allowed to because of the long grain in the mortise. Even if this split hadn't occurred, the seasonal changes would cause the wood to shrink and expand, and the elasticity of the glue would be under stress and would finally give out and the joint would come apart. It's perfectly normal for furniture to need regluing periodically. Contrast this rectangular mortise and tenon joint with this round mortise and tenon joint as exists in the stretcher system, which is similar to that in the rocking chair. The same cross-grained construction, only in this case the tenon is round and the mortise is round. But the same stresses exist, and eventually the joint loosens. Another type of joint is a dowel joint. The dowel is made by machine, and holes are drilled into both parts. It may look like a round tenon, but it's really a separate piece of wood. Notice how the dowels have remained in the rail. It's long grain, and in the leg it's cross grain. In summation, it's only natural that furniture needs regluing periodically. A potter makes a pot and can expect it to last forever. But because of the nature of wood, a woodworker can expect his furniture to last for only 50 to 100 years before it needs regluing. So let's take a look at some of the glues and how they are used. Almost all the repair work I do involves some form of gluing. Even when I make a new part, I still have to glue it on. Virtually all the glues on the market will make a bond stronger than the wood itself if used properly. The glues that I want to show you are the glues that are the most commonly available and the glues that I use. You are probably already familiar with white glue and yellow glue. They're both universally available and easy to use right off the shelf. You may not be as familiar with hot animal hide glue, although it's been around for thousands of years and was the only glue available to furniture makers before the Second World War. It may be a little bit more difficult to use, but it's my favorite because it offers so many wonderful advantages when doing repair work. It comes in flake form and pearl form. You pour it into water and it swells and looks a little bit like hot breakfast cereal. Then you apply heat either in an electric glue pot or a double boiler to approximately 140 degrees, and it will take on about the consistency of paint. If it's too thick, add a little more water. If it's too thin, let it simmer for a while or add some more glue. You can also use the baby bottle warmer. I use it when I want to make up a small quantity of a different consistency. There's a product on the market called liquid hide glue, but my experience with it is that it softens in high humidity. Check the booklet for more details. Now let's see how these glues work. I have here two boards that I've planed flat so that they make good contact. I'm going to apply glue to both surfaces. Always apply glue to both surfaces if you can. And you would expect that then I would put them in a set of to make a good glue bond. This is because when using white or yellow glue, you need to follow two rules. You need to have clean wood, and I achieved that when I planed them flat, and you need to have tight wood-to-wood contact. Both of these rules were broken in this drawer, where the applied molding apparently had come off and was glued back. The wood was not clean because the glue doesn't stick to the wood, and the glue is much too thick. It hadn't been pressed, so it didn't hold. Nails were added here to try to hold it in. Now it needs to be totally taken off, cleaned, and put back on. Now let's look at how hide glue works. I can take two similar boards, and by applying the glue, I can simply rub the boards together, squeeze out the excess glue, and make a good bond. This has applications in furniture repair and applying glue blocks and in hammer veneering, among other things. Hide glue has other advantages. Joints can be undone, the glue can be reactivated, and the glue will bond to itself. All of these characteristics I'll show you later. We'll begin by disassembling a piece. The most common problem that occurs in old furniture is that the joints work loose, as has happened in this oak chair from about the 1920s. This chair is doweled construction and round mortise and tenon around the stretchers. Before you take the chair apart, you'll need to remove any hardware and check for nails. If you find any nails in the joints, then it's appropriate to cuss a little because they're going to cause you some trouble removing them. I find that the easiest way to remove them is usually to dig around the nail and take a tool such as an electrician snips and pry the nail out. But it's never easy. The next step is to begin to disassemble the chair. You can use a rubber mallet, or you can use a carpenter's hammer and a piece of leather to keep from damaging the wood. But my favorite tool is a plastic mallet with shot inside. It gives a dead blow and is very effective for knocking furniture apart. And most joints will come right apart. Notice how I keep the pieces in some sort of order so I'll get them all back together right. Continue disassembling. This joint seems to be resisting. Remember I told you that one of the characteristics of hide glue was that you could undo a joint. When hide glue comes in contact with alcohol, it crystallizes. And then when you put it under a little pressure, you break the bond. A little alcohol into the joint. Let it sit for just a second. And then I should be able to knock it apart. And there it came. If you should get some alcohol on the finish and it should leave a white mark, then it's real easy to rub it out with some steel wool or steel wool oil combination. Continue disassembling until the piece of furniture is all apart. This chair is coming apart fairly easily, partly because it was put together with hide glue and the joints are old. If you run into joints that were put together with white or yellow glue, it's more difficult, but sometimes you can work some hot water or vinegar into the joint and it will soften the glue enough to get it apart, but it's much more difficult. When you get into epoxies and super glues, it's almost impossible to reverse the joint, but you can try it with acetone. Just be very, very careful because you're liable to destroy the finish at the same time. Arrange the pieces so that they make sense, so when you put them back together, you won't get them mixed up. Now that the chair is all apart, we're ready to clean the joints so that we can re-glue. If we choose to re-glue with any glue other than hot animal hide glue, then we'll need to remove all of the old glue before re-gluing. That's because glues will not bond well over other glues, with the single exception that animal hide glue will bond well to itself. Most old furniture was glued with hide glue, and it's very easy to remove. This is the stretcher system from the chair we just disassembled. I'm quite sure that it was put together with hide glue because of its age and because there's no evidence that it's been re-glued. Both the mortise and the tenon need to be cleaned, and hide glue washes off very easily in hot water. Turns a little gooey, like honey, and then just washes right off. And you can feel that it's raw wood. Cleaning the tenon is very easy. Cleaning the mortise is a little more difficult because it's harder to get to. You can take a rag, wad it up into a point, dip it in the mortise with hot water, wind it around, and it will take off most of the glue. Sometimes it's a little bit more resistant, and you can use a brush, a kitchen brush, scrub brush that you can get inside, and scrub around with it, or you can use some sort of a wire scrub brush that you can wad up and stick in and scrub around. It doesn't make very much difference as long as you break the glue away from the side. Hide glue melts so easily that you can oftentimes just stick your finger in, you can feel it get gooey and it washes right out. This is clean. I can feel that it's raw wood. Unfortunately, you're not always so lucky to get a piece of furniture that's been glued with hide glue. Often, it's been glued with white or yellow glue. This is a leg and a stretcher from another chair, and it has been re-glued with white glue. I can tell that because I've put some water in one of the mortises and it's turned milky white. White glue and yellow glue can be removed with hot water or vinegar, just like hide glue can, but it takes a lot more work. Let's work on the tenon first. Let's begin by applying some hot water with a cloth. It turns a little slippery. I can tell there's glue on it. It doesn't feel like raw wood. It's also turning a little white. It's going to need a little bit more scrubbing, so I'll take a wire scrubber, a wire kitchen scrubber, and scrub it. Sometimes you need to let it soak a little bit. This seems to be fairly clean now. The tenon is fairly easy. A mortise is more difficult because it's harder to get to. You can take the same wire scrubber and wad the end up into a point, shove it into the mortise, and scoot it around. Or you can use the same brush. Sometimes it's necessary to let the water, hot water or vinegar, sit in the mortise for a while and soften the glue. And no matter what you do, if you use water to clean the joint, you want to let the furniture dry before you start to re-glue. Other glues are even more difficult to remove than white and yellow glue. That's one good reason for not using them in the first place. You can try acetone or lacquer thinner, and they will melt out some of them. But some of them can't be melted with any solvent, and they'll have to be sanded off or scraped off. And this will cause the joint to become loose. Some joints are loose because they were made poorly, and some because they were repaired poorly. In any case, all of these will have to be built out so that they become strong. So let's take a look at how to do that. You remember that one of the basic rules for re-gluing is that you must have tight wood-to-wood contact. You can't glue air. Oftentimes you'll run across a joint that is already loose for some reason, or you may be forced to make it loose yourself by some operation you have to perform on it. I have here the front rail and two front legs from an oak chair that was made around the turn of the century. The side rail is loose. It's because the tenon is too small in the mortise. The operation to make it snug is really very simple. Add a piece of wood to one side of the tenon or both sides. I can add a solid piece of wood and trim it back, or I can add a thin piece of wood such as veneer if it's thick enough and be finished right there. Sometimes it's also necessary to add a little piece of wood here or here in order to make the tenon snug in this direction. I'll show you how I do this. I have here a piece of oak veneer. I've chosen oak because it's the same wood as that in the chair. It's always better if you can use the same wood for patches, but it's not critical because this one is going to be so thin. I'll cut a little piece slightly bigger than the tenon. I'm cutting out of the middle, and it may look wasteful, but the grain matches that of the tenon. I'll spread on some white glue. Any of the glues we're using will work equally well in this case. Then put the veneer on, scoot it around a little bit, make sure the glue is bonded. Add a piece of wax paper to act as a barrier against the glue, and then a little block of wood so that I can press it flat with a small clamp. A spring clamp works very, very well in this situation. I have here a rectangular tenon that I've already built out. By taking a knife or a chisel, I can very simply just trim it right off. Sometimes you may find that the piece that you've added is a little bit too thick. That's easy to trim down. A scraper is a handy tool to trim it down, or possibly a knife, a chisel, or a plane. So that's how I would do a rectangular mortise and tenon. Now let's look at a round mortise and tenon. This is the same stretcher system that we've seen before. And this tenon over here is loose. I can't really add a piece of veneer around the tenon. I wouldn't be able to bend it correctly. It would also be much, much too thick. But I can show you a very simple way of adding a shaving of wood that will build out the tenon and make it strong. This is a piece of maple. The grain is straight, and by using a plane, I can make a curl that will almost act as its own clamp. I would choose maple to use even on oak or mahogany because it has good linear strength and it doesn't split apart in thin strips like oak wood. Now you can control the thickness of the curl by adjusting your plane depth. Now by taking a little piece, you can see how it will almost form its own clamp holding to the tenon. Take some glue, spread the glue on the tenon, and wrap the curl around it. Wrap it just a little, wrap it one time around and just a little more, and then tear it off. The glue into an even film. When it's dry, trim the ends off, and because your fingers will almost necessarily have picked up a little bit of glue and spread it on the surface, you should sand it slightly in order to make the wood clean before you re-glue the piece of furniture. This other end I've already done, and if I sand it just a little bit, making sure that it's clean, and then try it in the other stretcher, that's a good fit. That sound indicates a very tight fit, so I've achieved a tight joint. This is how I handle loose mortise and tenon joints. Now I'll show you what I do with dowel joints. You could treat a dowel joint just like you do a round mortise and tenon. You clean the dowels and clean the holes and then re-glue. The problem is that with a dowel joint, you remember that a dowel is a separate piece of wood. So you're taking a chance that the dowel will then come loose from the other side. If I were dealing with a very rare and valuable piece of furniture, I might consider removing the dowel and reusing it in order to keep all the pieces original. But for more common furniture, I find it quicker and easier just to replace the dowels. Notice how, for this operation, it's very handy to have a workbench with a vise attached that will hold your work in a position where you can get to it. The first thing to try to do is to take a hammer and tap the end of the dowels to see if you can break a weak glue bond loose. Then take a pliers and see if you did any good. This one's flexing a little, but the glue bond isn't giving, so I'll split the dowel before I pull it out. This one will come. I got that one out. Next, take a saw and saw off the dowel just above the end of the rail. But first, notice that in this case, the dowel comes out of the rail at an angle. That will vary depending on the design of the furniture. You're going to want to remember that angle. I don't do it, but you might want to use a bevel gauge as a reference, setting it at the proper angle. Then go ahead and saw off the dowel. Now I take a drill bit that's 1/16 inch smaller than the size of the dowel. American furniture is commonly made with 3/8 or 7/16 inch dowels. In this case, it's a 3/8 inch dowel. So I'm going to take a 5/16 inch drill bit, 1/16 of an inch smaller, with a brad point so that I can center easily in order that I won't damage the sides of the holes. When you come to the end of the hole, you'll usually feel a little bit of a jolt because there's an airspace down there and the drill will move suddenly and you'll know you're there. Now you've got a 32nd inch wall of dowel on the inside of the hole, and you want to remove this, and you'll have the hole back to its original shape. So take a small chisel or other tool and dig it in between the wall of the hole and the dowel. And if the dowel is old, it should pop right loose. Then knock the pieces out. Now you've cleaned the dowel hole, and the next step is to take the regular size drill bit, which would be in this case a 3/8, and clean the glue off the sides of the wall. If any glue should remain in the holes, you can take a needle nose rasp and knock it loose from the sides. It's dry and brittle and usually comes loose quite easily. Now the holes are ready for re-gluing, but there's a little excessive glue right here on the top of the rail. You can take a hand scraper and knock that off real easily, and it's flat. Now it's ready for re-gluing. We've seen how to clean the old glue from the joints, how to build out the joints when necessary, and how to remove the dowels. I've done that in this chair that we disassembled earlier. Most of the work is in the preparation. Gluing up goes rather fast. When you have a complicated piece with many parts, you want to try to simplify it by figuring out a way to glue up a section of it and another section of it and then put those sections together. In the case of this chair, I've decided that the easiest way is to first glue up the back, which I've done, and then glue up the front, which I've done, and now I'll put these two together. The clamps do not need to stay on very long because once the piece is together, it will stay together. In fact, you don't even need clamps at all if you can get the pieces together tightly without them. I just glued up these two sections. The glue isn't even set yet, but it's not going to go anywhere. Now I'm ready to put in the dowels. Dowels come ready-made or in dowel rod form, and I'll choose to use the ready-made ones. And the first thing is to put glue in the dowel holes. Generally speaking, it's better to put the glue in the holes first, where it dries slower than out in the air. This is especially true when working with faster setting glues like hide glue and yellow glue. A successful glue-up requires a lot of organization and concentration, so I'm going to talk a lot less, and you'll get to see the pace at which I normally work. Notice the advantage of using a brush here instead of the squeeze bottle applicator the glue normally comes in. I know that these holes are deep enough to accommodate the dowels I'm using. Make sure you check on that or the piece won't come together. Sometimes you encounter odd-shaped holes. You can sand a larger dowel down, or you can build out a smaller dowel the same way you build out a round tenon. It's more important to move fast than it is to be overly concerned with how much glue you're applying. You don't want to fill the holes, but you do want to coat the surfaces. If the joint fits tight, it will distribute the glue, squeeze out the excess, and make a good bond. If you have any doubt about the positioning of the pieces or whether the piece of furniture will clamp upright, then dry clamp it first. Put it together, dowels and all, but without glue. Clamping can be a real juggling act, positioning blocks to protect the wood. That's why I like these plastic pads. Don't worry about the glue. There, it's together. But it's a little wobbly. It's not sitting flat on the table. This leg seems to be a little high. I can adjust that by changing my clamp to this angle. I'll pull this leg down, that leg up. And now it sits flat. There, that's all there is to it. But this chair was easy because the surfaces to be pulled together are flat and parallel. Oftentimes you're not so lucky. Behind me are some examples of non-parallel surfaces that have to be pulled together and the jigs involved in doing so. This is an Empire-style chair with a characteristic curve in the back leg. It's easy to see that if I were to put the clamp right up against the back leg, it would slide down and open the joint right here. What I've done is take a piece of plywood, hold it up against the side, scribe a line on the other side, and then cut out the shape. Then I can put the plywood between my clamps and I have flat parallel surfaces and I pull it together and get a nice tight bond. The same situation exists with this tripodal base. You can see that if I put the clamp here, it would slide off. So I make this little jig, and then I've got flat parallel surfaces, and I can pull the leg in. It's important to notice on this jig that it goes all the way around the foot. If I didn't bring it around the foot, then the entire jig would slide when I pull it together. This is a very common problem. You can see from many of the jigs that I've saved back here that I encounter it often, and I save the jigs in hopes of being able to reuse them, but I've never used the same jig twice. Sometimes you encounter a problem where the legs are opposed to each other and you have two non-parallel surfaces. The solution is simple and easy. Just make two jigs and then you have flat parallel clamping surfaces again. And reclamping a round tabletop can be a difficult problem that the maker didn't experience because he would have just glued up several boards and then cut out the circle. I was faced with the problem of a split top that had to be glued back together. If I had put a clamp between here and here, then I might have left the ends open. I want pressure here and over here, and in order to achieve that, I make two jigs and get flat parallel surfaces and pull them together. Flat parallel surfaces, though, don't always work. I have four joints, one here, one here, one here, and one here. There's no way to get flat parallel surfaces, but a band clamp will pull all the joints together. Now let me show you a situation where if you don't dry clamp first to find out where your problems will be, you might ruin a valuable piece of furniture. This is a Windsor chair that was made in the 1790s. The seat is split, caused probably by somebody pushing out too hard on the arm. The repair looks simple, doesn't it? Just spread glue inside the split and just put a clamp across the seat. Let's see what happens. Looks good on the top, but let's turn it over and look what happens underneath. The joint is open on the bottom side. The result will be that you'll have a thickness of glue that won't hold, and probably the chair has 10 to 15 years of life left before some very, very serious surgery will have to be done on it in order to save it at all. The solution to the problem is a jig that conforms to the side of the chair seat so that you have equal pressure top and bottom. Plywood is added on the top to keep the jig from sliding under. The jig is rather crude because it's pointless to spend a lot of time making one because the odds are you'll never have a chance to use it again. Add the clamp. And let's see what happens. The jig has pulled it in nice and tight. Up till now, I've shown you only white glue in regluing situations. Now let me show you some difficult repair situations and how hide glue can be used to advantage. Now I get to show you why I enjoy using hide glue so much for repair work. One of the characteristics of hide glue is that it will bond to itself. Old hide glue will melt with heat and moisture, and new hide glue is hot and moist. So when you apply the new to the old, even if it's 100 or 200 years old, it will still form a good bond. This is a drawer from an Empire chest of drawers from about the 1840s or 50s. It had come apart and needed regluing. I've already glued on this side. Later I'll repair the veneer on the front. Now I want to attach this side. The joinery is a dovetail construction. If I were to use any other glue but hide glue, I would have to clean all of these joints of the old hide glue before regluing. A very time-consuming and tedious job. But with hide glue, all I have to do is knock off any loose or deteriorated pieces of glue . Now I can apply the glue. You can see I have to work fast with hide glue to get the joint together before the glue gels. I use a block to distribute the pressure to keep from splitting the drawer side. If I take some hot water now, I can very easily wash off the excess glue. If you forget to do it at this point, it's a little more difficult, but you can still wash it off with hot water or peel it off even after several days. So the next step is to put the drawer bottom in. If you aren't going to put the drawer bottom in at this point, you'll need to make sure that the drawer is square. And you can do that by measuring the distance between opposite corners. They should be the same. But the drawer bottom will usually square up the drawer. When it's all the way in, the drawer should be square. Don't glue the drawer bottom in. It's held with nails along the back side to hold it in place. It should be allowed to float with seasonal changes. I've saved the original nails so that everything in the drawer will be original. This drawer is glued up. Now let's look at another advantage of hide glue. This little sewing table has two loose rails. You can see how I can wiggle the legs. But because of its construction, it would be difficult to take it all apart in order to reglue it. I can take advantage of the fact that it was glued with hide glue, and then I can bond new hide glue to old hide glue in order to repair the tenon here and the tenon here. So all I need to do is put some glue on the joints and wiggle it, work the glue into the joints pull it together and put a clamp on it. And it's done. This sort of repair worked real well because I was using hide glue and because hide glue was in the joint. But so often I see this repair attempted, this kind of repair, with other glues, and it doesn't work, and pretty soon there's a really big mess of glue in here and there's nothing to do. There's no way to repair it then except to take the whole piece apart. Begin with hide glue, working on hide glue, and it works the first time around. There's another sort of a repair that I can show you using glue blocks. This carcass has been partially put together with glue blocks. The places where there aren't glue blocks, it's very loose. The glue blocks where it holds the front frame onto the sides have held fine. Glue blocks make a very strong joint. Let me show you from an example that I made how strong it can be. A glue block is a block of wood that's cut to fit into a corner. It's rubbed on just with this on yesterday, and I'm going to break it now and see where it breaks. Clearly, it didn't break on the glue line, it broke on the wood, which meant that the joint was stronger than the wood. Now let me show you how I can use glue blocks to repair a piece of furniture. This is a little shaving mirror from about the mid-19th century. It appears to be in quite good shape, except there's something the matter with this joint. So let's turn it over and see what it is. The sides are held to the bottom with glue blocks. Some of them run long grain to long grain, and they appear to have held quite well. But these glue blocks, though holding fine to the side, which is long grain, have broken loose from the bottom, which is a cross grain. I could put glue in here, but I won't be able to get a good bond because I can't get a good contact. So what I'll need to do is remove the glue blocks, clean it, and then rub them back in the corner for a good bond. Taking a little alcohol, I can take advantage of one of the characteristics of hide glue, and that is that I can undo a joint. So if I squirt a little alcohol onto the glue blocks, give it a few seconds to work its way into the joint, I should be able to pop them loose. Once in a while you may split the wood. In this case it wouldn't be so awfully bad. I could just replace the glue block. You could use hot water, but it's usually simpler to use alcohol. Hot water will melt the glue, but it might do some other damage to the wood. It's a wonderful advantage of hide glue, being able to reverse a joint. It's probably the single quality I miss the most in white and yellow glue. Now they're all off, and I need to scrape off the chunks of glue just to make it smooth. Same thing with each of the glue blocks. Make sure there's no rough edges or lumps of glue that will get in the way of a smooth rub. The glue comes off quite easily. It's very old and brittle. Now I need to put a clamp on the shaving mirror so that it will stay in the correct position while I apply the glue blocks. Now I'll take a glue block, apply some glue to it. It'd be much easier in this case to apply the glue to the glue block than in the corner, but you could do it in the corner. Rub it into the corner. That's all that's necessary. You can see the importance in this case of the glue setting up and reaching a tack real quick. It grips very fast. At a certain point, it won't want to move anymore, and it's stuck real good. You can usually pull it off for quite some time, though, with some pressure. And if it's stringy, there's little strings in between, like there are there, when you pull it off, then the glue is still good and you can put it back. If it's gelled, very much like Jell-O really, if it's gelled, then it no longer has tack and will no longer grab. This one's on quite good now. Put the last one on. You can extend the working time of hide glue by warming the wood first, or by adding a chemical, urea, which you can get in a garden supply center. And that will keep it from gelling quite so quickly. Imagine how much more difficult a repair like this would have been if I would have been using a glue that would have required clamps. Other advantages of hide glue can best be illustrated by showing you some veneer repairs. A lot of old furniture is veneered. It's common that veneered furniture develops problems over time. The veneer works loose and sometimes gets chipped off and needs to be replaced. It's not a big job replacing the veneer. It's just thin wood and a new piece needs to be glued back on. Almost all of the veneers that have ever been used in furniture can be obtained today. I have here some of the veneers that I keep on hand in my shop. There's walnut in 2 different thicknesses, an 1/8 of an inch and a more standard 1/28 of an inch. 3 different types of veneer that show a variety from plain to fancy. Very common poplar, bird's eye maple, and rosewood. Three different types of veneer, all with the same name, oak. There's American white oak, that's quarter sawn, American red oak, that's plain sawn, and English brown oak. Two pieces of mahogany cut from different parts of a tree. It's plain mahogany and crotch mahogany. And 2 different types of burl, Carpathian elm and walnut. This is a crotch mahogany veneer off the top of a chest. And it displays the first problem that occurs in veneer. It comes loose from the substrate. This blister, if left alone, would eventually be knocked off and the pieces would disappear and we'd have to put in a whole new patch of veneer. It would be much easier if we could glue this back down right now. It's got hide glue underneath. I know that because of its age. And so we can take advantage of the fact that hide glue will reactivate with heat and moisture, and we can maybe re-stick it. The worst that would happen would be that maybe there isn't enough glue left underneath, in which case we could inject with a syringe a little more hide glue in the little crack here and then get it to bond to itself. Either one of those approaches would be better than injecting a new kind of glue, white glue or yellow glue or any other kind of glue, which won't achieve a good bond at all. So let's assume the best, that there's enough glue in here and that we can reactivate it and re-stick it. I'll take a cloth that's damp and an iron that's on low heat. I can always raise the heat. I don't want to damage the finish if I can help it. But even if I damaged the finish, it would be easier to repair the finish than it would be to patch in a whole new piece of veneer. The dampness of the cloth and the heat are beginning to soften up the veneer, and I can feel a little bit of tack when I push on it. So it's working. I think, though, that in this case the veneer has too much of a bow in it and it's not going to stick down like a rub joint, and I'm going to have to put a clamp on it. But it should work just fine. So let's go ahead and put a clamp on it. Piece of wax paper, a block of wood, and a clamp. This felt pretty good. I'm pretty sure it's going to work, but I'll check it later. If the bubble should reoccur, then I'll take a syringe and put a little hide glue underneath the bubble and then reclamp it. If it didn't have a crack in it, then I'd punch a hole with the syringe and put some hide glue in that way and then reclamp. This was a rather difficult repair because there was no way that I could get in underneath the veneer to clean it out. Let's look at a repair that's a lot easier because I can get underneath. When veneer comes loose, it's usually because of cross-grained construction. In this chair, the front rail runs this way and the veneer this way. Because of contrary wood movement, it's only a matter of time before the veneer works loose, and that's what's happened. You can see that the veneer is beginning to come away from the rail. Now, because this is on an edge, I can get under it and clean. If I used water to wash out the old glue, I might swell the veneer and cause further problems. Instead, I can use a piece of sandpaper. This is 100 grit sandpaper, but the grit is not important. I can slide it in and slide it around. It's sanding both sides, push down lightly from the top, and I can cause all the old glue to be released from the wood and get it quite clean this way. Notice the thickness of this old veneer. This chair was made around 1800, maybe a little bit before, and it's European, probably French. Now that it's clean, I can inject some glue in with a syringe or put it in with a piece of veneer. I could use white or yellow glue, but the problem is that because of the age of the chair, I really don't feel right doing that. So I'm going to use some hide glue. Don't worry about the glue making a mess because it can be cleaned up so easily with warm water. When the glue's in there, no matter what kind of glue you're using, you want to push it out so you don't have a lump. You can do that with your finger if you don't have a tool handy. You take some wax paper and a block and a clamp. Another way to clamp that often works is with some masking tape. Wrap it around the edge and pull it real tight. So it isn't absolutely necessary that you own clamps to be able to do a repair like this. So we've seen how to glue down loose veneer. Let's see what happens when the veneer is missing altogether. This is a fall front desk from the mid-19th century. It has a number of pieces of veneer missing from the cross banding, but what's even more interesting about this piece are the number of examples of bad veneer repair, like this one here. Here the line that comes across dividing the cross banding from the book-matched veneer in the middle is broken and catches your eye immediately. In other cases, there are pieces that come halfway or 3/4 of the way through the cross banding and then stop. Why wouldn't you run it all the rest of the way through the cross banding in order to hide the patch? A better repair is one that shows less. There's also cases of running the grain in the wrong direction. For instance, this piece runs this way. Why not put the piece in like that and have the grain run this way, like the grain around it? Let's take a look at some better ways to make veneer patches. On this drawer, I've left the wood just as I found it. The purest kind of repair is to leave every remaining piece just as it is and patch on a new piece conforming to what's remaining. Notice the thickness of the veneer. The piece I'm using had to be cut out of solid wood. The grain in the new piece follows the grain in the rest of the drawer. After I get it glued on, I can just trim it off and it will match exactly. Now let's look at another example. In this drawer, the veneer was missing along this little line I've drawn. If I would have replaced that little patch, it would have shown here where the grain came to an end. So I followed this grain line up to the book match line and then find a piece of veneer that matched this little part, which is the reverse of that part, as closely as I could. Let me show you the replacement I've chosen. I had to cut it out of the center of a piece of burled walnut. But when I get it trimmed down, the grain line will follow the old pattern almost exactly. And after I get it colored in, the seam will be almost invisible because it will follow the grain line. A third and much simpler way is the way I've done it on the top of this sewing machine lid. The diagonals are straight lines and therefore easier to cut. By matching the grain up, the grain will follow, even including a seam that runs all the way through here. And once I get this colored in, because it's a diagonal and not a straight across the grain line, it will be very easy to disguise. I'm going to show you how to do a repair like this on this table. You can see here a piece of veneer has been chipped out. An easy way to repair this would be to cut a triangle shape out here, remove the veneer on the inside, and then cut a similar shape out of this matching veneer and lay the piece in. Because the lines don't cross the grain, it will be easy to color it in and hide it. So let's do it. The first step is to cut this veneer. Normally, when I'm doing this sort of repair, I just pretty much eye it in and then cut the veneer to match and shape it as I go. But there's several other ways of doing it. I could cut out the piece of veneer and then trace it onto the tabletop. Any way you want to do it is equally okay. If there's any problem with getting the veneer out, remember that it's put down with hide glue. You can slip a little alcohol under it and it will allow you to get it loose. If I make a mistake here, it's no real big problem. I can just make my triangle shape a little bit bigger. An effective way to clean the glue off is with a hand scraper. If I were going to use hide glue, I wouldn't need to do this step, but I've decided that because the table is not especially old or valuable, because I want to show you that yellow glue and white glue work almost exactly the same, I'm going to glue this patch in with yellow glue. Now I'm ready to cut out the piece out of the matching veneer. Notice how the grain runs in the same direction, and then sort of eye the shape. Make the piece a little bit bigger, and then I'll trim it back. Maybe because I'm a little lazy and don't want to get involved with all the tracing tools, I find it works faster this way. That's pretty close. Let me show you what I'm doing here. You might be able to see that this line, this edge of the piece of veneer is not perfectly flat. What I'm doing is running it across the block plane so that I flatten it out. That's the ease of doing the repair in this way, is that I'm dealing with straight lines, and a simple tool like a block plane is very effective. That's pretty good. I might take off just a little bit more right off of this end than from the point. And it should fit just about exactly now. That's it. The seams are tight, the grain is aligned, the coloring will hide it almost completely. So let's glue it in. In this case, I usually just put the glue right on the wood and not on the veneer, because the veneer is so thin it swells so fast. Then slide the veneer into place, rub it a little bit, make sure it's positioned. Get a piece of wax paper, small board, and a clamp. And it's done. You want to be sure and use veneer that's slightly thicker than the veneer you're replacing, so that when it's dry you can cut it back. Otherwise you're going to have to cut the other veneer down to meet it, and you'll lose your flatness. Unfortunately, all veneer repairs are not on flat surfaces. Sometimes they're on curved surfaces, as on this OG clock case. This was a very popular style in the late 19th century. There were thousands of them made, and many of them have survived, most of them with the same problem. That is, that the veneer, which runs in a cross-grain construction, goes this way on the OG curve, whereas the substrate runs that way. And the veneer over time has peeled loose, and much of it is missing. The problem is, if you were to try to bend the thin veneer in its long grain direction, when you glue it on, it will probably break. And so the solution is to first of all make a negative out of wood, or you could even use styrofoam. You can use a contour finder to help you get the shape. Then take the veneer that you're going to use, wet it. When wood, and especially thin wood like veneer, becomes wet, it becomes very pliable. Put it on the surface, and with this curved clamping block, clamp it and let it dry, and it will keep that shape. Then put glue in, put the piece on, put the clamping block on, and clamp it. There's another way to handle curved surfaces, and that's by using a hammer veneering technique. This is a veneer hammer. People think of a hammer as a pounding tool. A veneer, the best thing to do is remove the veneer and replace it. You remember that hide glue melts with moisture and heat. So I've been applying water to the surface of the veneer in order to let it soak into the veneer. I'll add a little bit more water, and then I'll apply heat with an iron, and I'll be able to lift the veneer. Apply a hot iron. The iron's already very hot, so as to work the moisture through the veneer and reverse the glue. I can use a wide putty knife and get under the veneer and begin to lift it. I'm not worried about destroying the veneer, having the veneer buckle with all the steam and the heat and the water, because I'm going to remove it anyway. That's the object. Sometimes this goes very fast, almost as fast as you can move down the piece. Other times it takes a while. I've got another drawer here that I've already prepared, so let me switch these two and I'll show you how to do hammer veneering. On this drawer front, I've removed all the veneer, and I've used a hand scraper to just scrape over the surface so I won't have any rough places. For this operation, I'm going to use a large brush because I can spread the glue much faster this way. Spread it over the entire surface. Work fast. And then take the veneer, lay it upside down on the surface, and spread the glue on what will become the bottom side. Explain to you why. And flip it over. It allows the veneer hammer to slide better. It isn't going to make any difference because I can either wash it off or sand it off. Slid on me just a little bit there. Get one end down real good. As I was saying, I could wash it off afterwards or sand it off, or if I used a water dye stain, I wouldn't need to take it off anyway because the water would penetrate through the hide glue, melt it. Though I usually clean it. The little crackling noise that you hear is the glue being squeezed out, because that's what you want to do. You want to squeeze the glue out just like a rub joint. Just like a rub joint, that's what it is. This is going down beautifully. Now when you have problems, which oftentimes you do, you can add moisture or heat. You need to judge which one at any given time you want, but you can put a little heat with a hot iron. This is on low. Don't want it too hot. Soften up the glue underneath and get a little more crackle sound as I pull more glue out. No more crackle right up there, so I've got all the glue out. And I could do this probably just as easily and just as fast if I were with contact cement. I always choose to use hide glue because one reason is just because I like it, but because later on down the line there will be problems. There are always problems with veneer, and hide glue will be easy to repair, and contact cement will be almost impossible to repair. That's the great advantage of hide glue, is when it comes time to do a repair. See if I can see. It looks pretty good. The edges are all down. If the top should begin to swell up like this, add a little water and it'll flatten down. You want to try to keep from adding too much water though, because you swell the veneer. I'll let this sit a little bit, maybe 15 to 30 minutes, until I'm sure it's not going to come up on any edges, and then while the glue is still soft, I'll take a chisel or a razor blade knife and trim the edges almost flush. Not quite, but just almost. Because it'll be easier than if I wait until it's all hardened. And you've got this squeeze out on the edges here. You want that because what you're wanting to do is push all the excess glue out. But that will cause problems with knives if you let that dry. So usually I try to peel that away and trim it off fairly close, and then the next day do the final trimming. This seems done. That's hammer veneering. So far, we've been dealing with some really rather minor veneer problems. Sometimes the substrate causes very serious veneer problems. I want to show you a couple of those. If you look at this English grandfather clock, down on the base, you can see how the veneer has buckled because the substrate, the grain of which runs in an up and down direction, has shrunk and left the veneer, which runs cross grain and diagonal, with no place to go but to pop loose from the substrate and buckle out. The repair will be difficult because the veneer in this place, it overlaps, will have to be cut in order to go back, and in this place something will have to be done to relieve the stress and allow it to be pushed back. It can't be pushed back right now. Now let me show you an even more difficult repair. On both parts of the top of this mid-19th century card table, the substrate has caused the veneer to split in many places. This is a very common problem on furniture made in the first half of the 19th century because of the construction technique that they were using then. They would make a frame around the outside, both of them, and several boards making a panel on the inside on both of them. The separate boards shrink, but the outside pieces of the frame won't allow them to. Well, the common repair that's tried is to fill this gap with some kind of a filler. And this has been tried in this case too. It's only a temporary repair because the boards continue to shrink and expand with seasonal changes. Given the value of this particular piece of furniture, my choice would be to try to live with it as it is. Repairing furniture is always a matter of making choices. I've tried to give you several alternatives between what I regard as rather poor choices to a simple repair to even replacing all of the veneer using a hammer veneering technique. Which of these techniques is appropriate for a particular piece of furniture is a matter of personal judgment, weighed against time and ability. The last thing I'd like to talk about is repairing broken parts. I have here a rung from this early 20th century pressback chair. It was broken at both of the tenons, so I turned a new one and put it in the chair. It's very common that I'm asked to make new parts, but just as in veneer repair, it's often possible to patch a part which saves time and also saves a lot of the original. I've been able to do that also in this same chair where the caning had broken out part of this rail, and I just put in a new patch of wood, and now it can be recaned. A common problem drawers have is that the bottom splits out the side, as in this case. I could replace the whole side, but it's a lot easier to remove the side, as I've done here, and just replace the bottom part with a patch. And then I have to cut only half a dovetail instead of all of them. In this old French chair, the crest rail has been repaired rather poorly so many times that it would be pointless to go on and try it again. It's either going to have to be replaced or it's going to need to be patched. Making the patches would be a lot easier. Cut it off here and cut it off here, put on a patch on each side, the piece rejoined, and then the moldings continued. On this arm, I can show you two different ways to make a patch. It's been broken at the joint in two places. A pure repair would be to cut a little triangle out here and patch in a new piece of wood and clean this break up and patch in a new piece here. A faster and probably stronger way would be to cut the arm off right along the grain, patch on a piece of wood, recut the mortise, and then continue these lines. Either way would be a lot easier than making a whole new arm. This continuous arm Windsor has a patch in it where Windsors of this type commonly break, where the spindle comes through the bend in the arm. This patch is held up quite well, but it calls a lot of attention to itself because instead of being bent like it should have been to conform to the bend in the chair, that illustrates the importance of grain direction both cosmetically and structurally. This is a chair from the early 20th century that came into my shop both loose and needing regluing, and the top part of the leg was broken off. Here's the piece, and I couldn't join it back because it was broken along the end grain and had a gap in it across the top and all down one side that wouldn't pull back together. So I was faced with the problem of either making a whole new leg or patching in a new part to replace that missing piece. To make a new leg would have been an awful lot of work because of the carvings on the foot and also all of the joinery involved up here. And so I decided that I would put in a scarf joint. To understand the importance of grain direction in a scarf joint, imagine a rectangular board that has a large part of a corner missing. You don't want to cut in a patch across the grain because wood does not bond well end grain to end grain. It bonds well long grain to long grain. So instead, you want to cut a long diagonal scarf line which follows the long grain as closely as possible. Then take another board with similar grain and cut out a complementary piece. Join that piece to the original and you will have a strong bond because of the long grain to long grain contact, and it will be easy to hide the bond because the grain will flow. You can see here that the patch follows the long grain of the wood and makes a good bond. It also lines up with the direction of the grain in the leg so that when I color this in, it will be virtually impossible to distinguish the joint that I've made. Now here in this Windsor chair is one of the most common problems in furniture repair that a scarf joint can solve. The round tenon of the curved back and the tenons of these two spindles have broken off in the seat. Commonly I see nails and screws driven up from underneath or brackets put on behind. None of them work for very long. The proper repair is to cut a long scarf on the back side of the back and also on the spindles, patch on a new piece, cut a new tenon, and then put the chair back in the seat. I want to show you how to do this repair on another chair. This is an oak rocking chair whose back post had been broken off where the tenon went into the chair seat, just like it did on that Windsor chair. The other back post had broken in the same place and one of the front posts. You can see how difficult it would be to make a new part with this spiral turning. So I've decided to make a scarf joint. I've already cut off the piece and left the grain very long. Also, I've cut it on the back side of the post so that when I put the chair back together, the new wood won't be seen easily. I've already cut the complementary piece. It could go this way or it could go this way. But this way you can see that the grain does not run straight with the post. So it should go this way so that the grain is now straight. Since this is a bandsawn surface, the next step is to plane it flat. That looks good, so it's ready to glue up. Normally in a situation like this, I would use hide glue and do a rub joint because it's quick. But in this case, I'd like to show you some clever little clamps that frame makers use, so I'll use white glue instead. Put the glue on both surfaces. And in a situation like this, I usually rub it like this, just a little bit, just like a rub joint, in order to squeeze out the excess glue. Then I'll put on one of these clamps at a slight angle. The clamps have little adjustable teeth that grip at non-parallel angles and can hold objects that would normally slide, as this would, in place if you put them at a reverse angle. That should be fine, except for the fact that I got a little more glue on here than I needed to. As soon as the glue is dry, this is ready to shape. I've got one here that I've already glued up. The shaping process varies depending on what shape you want to imitate. In this case, I would trim it as much as I could on a bandsaw to cut it roughly into the shape I want. And then I take a rasp and continue making the spiral shape. I've got one here that I've already partially finished making the spirals. The tenon can also be shaped with a rasp. There's one more technique that I'd like to show you for replacing missing parts. There are an infinite number of shapes of moldings. Moldings are always falling off and need to be replaced. There's no way that I can keep enough different shapes of molding planes to replace all of these parts. Plus, in addition to that, many of them were made by machines and don't have molding planes that fit them anyway. In this drawer, which is from a Victorian bookcase, and therefore was machined, this molding is fairly complicated, and these pieces are missing, probably due to contrary wood expansion. The tool that I use to reproduce them is called a scratch stock. It's a very simple little tool, a block of wood cut into an L shape with a slot cut in from the end and a screw to hold a metal blade in tight so it doesn't move. Then you take files, metal files, or a grinding wheel if you can get one to the right shape, and make the reverse pattern of the molding that you want to reproduce. To use a scratch stock, simply rub it back and forth over a piece of wood using this part as a fence in order to cut the shape that you want. It'll cut in both directions. On this piece of walnut, I've used this shape to reproduce the missing molding from this drawer, just by going back and forth until it's scratched out the shape that I want. All I have to do now is cut it off, miter it, and apply it to the drawer. A scratch stock can also be bought ready-made. This is commercially available from mail order houses. It comes with blanks to make the cutters out of. A scratch stock has an advantage over a molding plane in that it can cut curves, such as the curve on the molding on this drawer front. On this side, this part of the molding was missing, and I replaced it with the piece you can see here. With this scratch stock, which is based on the same principle as the other one, except in place of the fence, there's a point. Here's how it works. I run it back and forth until I form the contour that I want. I cut out the piece that I needed, and I applied it. I enjoy doing repair work because it's a challenge. A skill is a combination of knowledge and experience. I hope I've helped you on the knowledge part.
Here are scenes from the Taunton Press video workshops featuring fellow enthusiasts. Dovetail a drawer and making mortise and tenon joints with Frank Klaus. Repairing furniture and refinishing furniture with Bob Flexner. Radial arm saw joinery with Curtis Erpelding. Bowl turning with Del Stubbs, and also turning wood with Richard Raffin. A third tape with Klaus, wood finishing. Carving, techniques and projects with Sam Bush and Mac Headley. Chip carving with Wayne Barton. Router jigs and techniques with Bernie Moss and Michael Fortune. Making kitchen cabinets with Paul Levine. Small shop tips and techniques with Jim Cummins. And the three-part series, tiling floors, tiling walls, and tiling countertops with Michael Byrne.